and welcome back. For those that continue to watch these videos, I appreciate it. I like to put these together for my fun and entertainment, but also to provide anyone that may be thinking about building an RV-14 a little bit of insight into what you may be getting yourself into. And I've begun putting in other angles, so it's a little more entertaining, I guess, than the single view that I've had in the previous videos. You'll see the GoPro in the background there near the garage door, and I was able to get a new angle, as you see here. So I'm in the process of dimpling the structure or the skeleton of the vertical stabilizer. All the sides that will meet up with the skin get dimpled so that everything, the skin will also, as you saw in a previous video, be dimpled. So it all sits in flush, and the rivets are able to be pressed and sit flush within the skin there. So there's as little amount of protrusion as possible to minimize the air drag. So I go through, and that's the pneumatic squeezer that I'm using there, and it's nothing more than a pneumatic ram. It squeezes a dimple die. I've got a male and a female end attached to either side of the yoke, which is the black part at the end. It's called the yoke. And you line it up with the male, the stub of the male dimple through the hole, and then just squeeze the trigger, and it presses the two pieces together and forms a dimple. And you have to be careful, obviously, as you're lining up, as I've found on the vertical stabilizer skin. If you don't line it up just right and you actuate it, you can easily puncture the aluminum. So you got to be careful as what you're doing, and making sure you're not rushing things, and try to minimize any chance that you might damage the skins, obviously. So this is the forward spar of the vertical stabilizer. Going through, I believe that I had dimpled the majority of one side before the adjustable ram had bent to where I couldn't use it anymore, and that's why I was taking a look there. But just go through and, like I said, each hole, line it up, make sure it's good to go before you squeeze the trigger and press the two pieces together. Now there's a couple different yokes. Again, the black piece at the end. This one is designed to get around lips. For instance, on this piece, the large flat area, if I was to need to dimple something on that face, well, this has got the edge there, the flange that comes out at a 90 degree angle. So this yoke has a little bit of space there so that you can get around that lip, around that 90 degree angle, and so that when it squeezes, you don't risk damaging the flange. And then there are other types of yokes that are more narrow if you need to get into a smaller gap area. For instance, the rib at the very top of this is very small and narrow, and I'm not able to get any of the yokes to fit in there. And this is how you change out the yoke, actually, is what I'm doing here. I've got disconnect the hose for safety so you don't actually actuate the trigger with your finger in the way. And these are quick release pins that I purchased from Cleveland Aircraft Tools. And you easily take those out, you remove the yoke, and then you remove the die from the yoke, and then the die from the ram. And normally the pneumatic squeezer comes with bolts to hold the yoke in place, so you'd have to unbolt them and then put the new pieces in and the new yoke in, and then re-bolt it and tighten it down. So you can get the quick release pins, which are just pins with rubber grommets in to hold them in place, and it makes it a lot faster to change out the yokes. And so now I've got this is a more narrow yoke. It doesn't have that lip to be able to go around the flange. But I'm not, in this case, I'm doing the dimples on the flanges themselves, and so I don't need to get around any kind of lip. So this this works just fine. Um, and so once you put it back together, you put the pins back in and reattach the air hose, and you're ready to go. So the quick release pins, they help out quite a bit. They make it quite a bit faster to interchange the yoke on this. So that was wanted to show that at normal speed, just to show the process of dimpling and using the pneumatic gun, pneumatic squeezer. It's a great tool. It's both for making dimples and then also for squeezing rivets, and it's fairly useful tool. You'll use it quite a bit. I think that on the Cleveland aircraft tools, it was, I want to say, somewhere between $500 and $600, and then they had a package kit that included, I believe, 3 different yokes, and it might have been $700, somewhere in there. But it's one of your more expensive tools, but it's well worth it. You use it a lot. It just makes it so much easier. The other option is to get the manual squeezer, and it's basically a giant lever action type tool, and it uses leverage around a pivot point to squeeze whatever your die, dimple die or rivet squeezer. And I think that this is a lot easier in that everything is compact. You simply move a trigger to use pneumatic pressure to squeeze, whereas the hand tool, you have to make sure that you got both hands on the handles of the squeezer, and you got to make sure something's holding the piece of your hand and you're holding the tool just right. This one, you can hold the piece in your hand and hold the squeezer in your other hand and just use your thumb to actuate it. And it's very controlled, very easy to ensure that you don't accidentally move the squeezer or accidentally puncture a hole in your skin because you didn't quite hold it in place just right. I think it's one of your more valuable purchases out of all the tools that you would get for your kit. So this is now I'm working on that very tip rib. It's very narrow. Couldn't get the squeezer in there. So this is the little die tool that I had installed on my table from a previous video. I believe I showed it. But it's just a female 3/32 dimpler. So I've taken a male dimple die, and I take the rib and place it over the edge of that, where line it up with the holes, and take a hammer. And it's kind of a tricky way to do it because the die, when you hit it with the hammer, it goes flying off, and you got to go find it. And that's what you're seeing me do there, and you'll see me do it almost every time. And but it makes it a lot easier to get into those small places. And again, the die flew off when I hit it with the hammer. I've got to find another way to do that, but it works. I tried, there's a dimpler that you can get that you use with the blind rivet tool, and it uses the rod that the blind rivet usually uses to squeeze the blind rivets, but it's attached to 2 dimple dies, and unfortunately you still have to have the room to get the rod through, and it just didn't work with this. So this is the only way I could think of to dimple these holes here. It's not going to be as good as with the squeezer, obviously, because you're using a hammer on something that's not exactly, it's not as stable as using a squeezer to squeeze both ends of it. There is some give with the tool that's attached to the table, so it's not going to be quite as good of a dimple. But I tested it with a little piece of metal that I've made a dimple in to test, that make sure that the skin would sit flat, and it works. It does well enough. So that's another piece that I got with the RV-14 tool kit from Cleveland Aircraft Tools, and it works just fine. You just put it on the edge of the table so it doesn't interfere with anything else, and it works for what it's intended to be used for. So I'm getting pretty close to finishing up with the skeleton. Like I said, I have the replacement skin and the replacement rear spar doubler. They're still sitting in the package that they were delivered in, as of the time I'm editing this video anyway. And I'm getting pretty close to where there's nothing more to do until I get those pieces in place. So I believe the next video will be the first video of this spar. I'm sorry, the rudder, and making those pieces to put that together. So I'm going to let this video run out here. And again, for those who are watching, I appreciate it. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them down below. And if you would, click that like button and help me get the attention of others who might be interested in this project.